Your taste in music locked in around 14, and your appetite for financial risk locked in around whatever the market happened to be doing when you first had money in it. Welcome to a special edition of Money Lessons. I'm Andy Temte, and today is Monday, August the 24th, 2026. Most weeks I write about money. Today I'm writing about a rock band, my rock band, and a 3-word complaint that sent me back to something that I've been teaching for years and getting slightly wrong. So stay with me. The wiring underneath that complaint is the same wiring that decides how you handle your money. For 22 years and counting, I've been the front man for a modern classic rock band called The Remainders. Every summer, when we post a set list ahead of a show, the same 3 words or a version of it show up in the comments. Cue the eye roll, same old songs. I've seen some version of it for years, and for years my reaction was the one that you might expect. This time, however, it landed a little differently, and I've been chewing on it ever since. Not as a musician getting defensive about a set list, but as someone who spent a good part of my career writing and talking about why change, and especially in an organizational setting, is so hard. And I want to be precise about that because I think we get it backwards. Organizations don't resist change. Organizations don't have a nervous system. People resist change. One human at a time, each on their own timeline and for their own reasons. What we call organizational resistance is really dozens of separate people moving at dozens of different speeds around one change initiative. All at the same time, sometimes 3 steps ahead, some are dug in, and most are somewhere in the middle, quietly hoping that it all blows over. If you want to understand why that big organizational transformation at your workplace has stalled, you have to start with the wiring of the human beings, which is where those 3 words come in, because quote-unquote same old songs is actually absolutely right. And the reason it's right is one of the cleanest illustrations of that human wiring that I've ever come across. Now, we have to pause on when our musical tastes and preferences get set, and they get set early, and there's real research behind it. Psychologists call it the reminiscence bump, our tendency to recall a disproportionate share of life's memories between the ages of 10 and 30. A 2020 study out of Durham University showed 470 people aged 18 to 82, a list of 111 hit songs spanning 65 years of the charts, and asked which ones carried memories. The peak came right around age 14, when the economist Seth Stevens-Davidowitz went through Spotify's listening data for the New York Times. He landed in roughly the same place. The most important window for men forming their lifelong musical taste was between the ages of 13 and 16, and for women, 11 to 14. Of course, the women were ahead of the men. So, 14 years old, before most of us could drive. Sit with that for just a moment. The music you loved before you had any idea of who you were going to become is the music you'll be reaching for when you turn 70. Not because you evaluated all the options and concluded that whatever you like is superior, but because when you happen to be alive. And I am Exhibit A. I've been singing rock music in front of people since I was 14 years old. Almost 50 years now. I don't call myself an old rock and roller for nothing. That's not a preference, it's an identity. Now, music is the easy example, but the same thing happens with money, and there's research behind that too. 2 economists Malmiendier and Nagel published a study in the Quarterly Journal of Economics in 2011 with a title worth remembering: Depression Babies. They took nearly 50 years of household survey data, what American families said about money and what they held, and lined it up against what the stock and bond markets had done over the course of those families' lives. What they found is the money version of the reminiscence bump. People who had lived through stretches of weak stock market returns said they were less willing to take financial risk. They were less likely to own any stocks at all. When they did own stocks, they kept a smaller slice of their savings in them, and they expected lower returns in the years ahead long after the weak stretch that shaped that expectation had ended. People who'd lived through bad years in the bond market were less likely to own bonds. And the effect was strongest in the young, and there's really a very plain reason for that. A 50-year-old watching the market fall has 30 years of other evidence to weigh against it: good years, flat years, and recoveries. A 22-year-old has almost no experience. That downturn is close to the whole of what they've seen, so it counts for far more in shaping what they come to believe about the markets. The same rough patch an older investor shrugs off can set the terms for a younger investor's next 4 decades. So, your taste in music locked in around 14, and your appetite for financial risk locked in around whatever the market happened to be doing when you first had money in it. Neither one was a considered judgment. Both feel like one. And that's the uneasy part. The wiring never announces itself as your wiring. It announces itself as taste, as common sense, as the way I've always thought about music or money. Now here's why this matters well beyond music. In my first book, Balancing Act, I wrote about the clay layer, the permafrost that forms in the middle of an organization, made up of middle managers and long-tenured staff who dig in their heels and wait for change to pass. I argued that resistance to change stems from a fear of losing control and a desire for consistency, and that the need for security and safety sits just above food, water, and shelter in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I also wrote that we get so comforted by the knowledge we already have because it makes the world simple and understandable that we resist information that might challenge it. I stand by all of that from Balancing Act. What I didn't appreciate until a distant acquaintance complained about our set list is how ordinary the underlying mechanism is and how far it reaches beyond the workplace. Nobody in a strategy meeting at the office says, "I refuse to learn the new system because the old one is wired into me and I find the new one threatening." Instead, they resist in code, or they say nothing and they slow walk it. Also, nobody at a kitchen table says, "I've never once looked at what's inside my retirement account because the way I first learned about money is wired into me, and looking at it would mean admitting that there's something here that I don't understand." That one doesn't even get said in code. It just doesn't ever get said. But that same person will announce at the bar or online cheerfully, without a shred of embarrassment, that rock music peaked in 1979 and everything since is noise. Same instinct all 3 times. Same wiring. 2 of them we keep to ourselves. The 3rd we say out loud to a stranger. And that's what makes musical taste such a useful mirror for change? It's resistance to change with the stakes removed. Nobody's job is on the line and nobody's savings are at risk, so we admit it freely, which means we can actually look at it. And what we see is that the preference isn't a considered judgment at all. It's a groove worn in at exactly the age when we begin to explore, flex, and find our own footing in what we like and don't like, often in direct reaction to the adults who are raising us, whose own tastes and preferences had hardened decades before. We think that we're choosing, and we are partly, but also being handed the terms of the choice. If something that harmless can wire in that deeply, what do you suppose is happening with the beliefs that do have your livelihood or your life savings attached to them? Now, the obvious conclusion is that we should all fight this, continuously broaden our horizons, never let those grooves in the record form. Well, that's wrong, and I want to be careful here because it's the kind of advice that sounds rigorous but isn't. The comfort of the familiar isn't a character defect, and it isn't something we should be trying to engineer out of people. The music, the places, and the ideas that formed us early are a good part of what makes us who we are. Strip all of that away, and you don't get a nimble, agile person, you get an unmoored one. In business, the equivalent is the reorganization that burns everything down the long-timers knew and never wrote down, all in the name of transformation. Most of us have watched one of those slow-motion train wrecks at our own place of work. So the work isn't to demolish your core, it's to keep expanding your edges. Now, I sing periodically with a lacrosse jazz orchestra. Standing in front of a big band is a genuine thrill, and it has stretched me as a vocalist in ways that rock and roll never has. Different phrasing, different breath, different relationship to the beat entirely. Has it made me a jazz aficionado? Heck no. I'm an old rock and roller, and I will be one for the remainder of my days. Pun intended. Get it? The remainder of my days. But back to the jazz, I am a better performer for it. My core didn't dramatically shift, but my edges got wider. That's the balancing act, and it's the same one I'd ask of anyone on a team I lead. I'm not asking you to stop being who you are. I'm asking you to be purposefully uncomfortable at the margins on a regular basis, in small doses, as a practice rather than at some emergency. Curiosity at the edges is what keeps my center from turning into permafrost or that clay layer that I described previously. With money, it turns out to be more concrete than it sounds, and a good deal less painful than people expect. Open the statement you've been leaving unopened. Find out what you're paying for the thing you set up 6 years ago and haven't looked at since. Run the real number on something you've been carrying around as a rough guess. What a balance is costing you in interest, what a subscription adds up to over a decade. Learn one term you've been nodding along to for years in the financial lexicon without quite knowing what it meant. None of that asks you to become a different person about money. It's the same move as singing with a big band. Your core doesn't dramatically shift. The edges get wider. And the reason to do it in small doses on an ordinary Tuesday is that the alternative is doing it all at once under a pressure in a month when something has already gone wrong. The most adaptable people I've worked with were never the ones without strong convictions. They were the ones who held their convictions and stay genuinely curious about everything outside of those convictions. Now, let me bring this thread back to the set list that we started off with, because the same principle governs how we build one. Our 2026 Moon Tune set list, which is our next show, runs 24 songs. 14 of them weren't in our set in 2025. Exactly half of the 2025 set didn't make the cut this time, and 9 of the 24 that we're going to play this year are ours, songs that we wrote. The year before, we only played 4 of our originals. So the literal complaint of same old songs doesn't quite hold up, but the more useful point is that both of the numbers are deliberate. The turnover of songs is intentional to keep things relatively fresh. So is the repetition. They're doing the same job, not opposing ones. And that's because people don't show up empty-handed at a show. They come carrying specific songs that they're hoping to hear, the ones wired in at age 14. And a band that ignores that is telling its audience that their memories don't matter. It's why greatest hits albums exist at all. I saw Rush in Chicago on July 20th of this year with my son Nick. Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson back on a stage after 11 years with Anika Niles behind the kit in the seat that Neil Peart made sacred. If they'd walked off without playing Limelight or Spirit of Radio, I'd have gone home genuinely let down, and I'd have been within my rights to do so. You go hear the songs that define the band, and Rush know it, and they've been open about what this tour is. It's a celebration of the music and a tribute to Neil. That's why there's a Rush medley in our set this year, and why it's in every set we'll play in 2026. Not because we're short on ideas, but because Rush came back, and that deserves marking. And because for every one of us who got to see a show in Chicago, there are hundreds of people in the Cooley region that didn't. And the new material in our set list? That's the edge work. Every original we play is a small act of purposeful discomfort for us and for the audience. As a songwriter, the distance between a song existing in your head and a song existing in the world is enormous. I dreamt up our new song Paradise on my tractor on the 1st of June in 2025, mowing our walking paths and riding past the blackberries in bloom. The first lines and the melody arrived together, more or less whole, but we released it a year later, a year of refining, arranging, recording, mixing, mastering, and second-guessing for 3 minutes and 10 seconds of music. 12 original songs we've published now, and a good many more that were left on the cutting floor that I wrestled with and will never see the light of day. So I owe the commenter of Same Old Songs a huge thank you, and I mean that without a trace of irony or sarcasm. Okay, well, just maybe a hint. But those 3 words, Same Old Songs, started a thread going in my head. And there will be a few nights in the coming weeks where a melody and a couple of lyric lines rattle around at 2 o'clock in the morning while I lie there quietly next to Linda, not moving, hoping I'll still have whatever I'm dreaming of in the morning. Whether anything comes of it, who knows? But I might get a new song called Same Old Songs. Those 3 words also sent me back to my own work with a sharper question that I had before. I've spent years telling leaders that their teams resist change because of fear and a hunger for consistency. Those are all true, but I'd been treating it as an organizational disease to be managed when it's really just what human beings are, visible in every one of us every time we skip past an unfamiliar song to get to the one we already love, and every time we leave an account alone for another year because opening it would mean learning something that we don't yet know on the financial side. You can't manage that out of people. You can only build the habit of stepping past the discomfort a little at a time on purpose. The same old songs. We, in the remainders, will keep playing them loudly and proudly. I wish you all grace, dignity, and compassion. My name's Andy Temte, and this is Money Lessons. You can find the show on all the major streaming services as well as out on YouTube. Please like, subscribe, rate, and most importantly, share this public educational good with your friends, your family, your colleagues, and maybe a neighbor. We'll see you next time. The show was produced by Nicholas Temte.